Our lesson today is to be able to multiply and divide rational numbers. To multiply or divide rational numbers, use the same rules for signs as you use for integers. Alright? If we take a look at a couple of examples here, right? When we multiply fractions, we multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. 2 times 1 is 2. 7 times 3 is 21. But because you're multiplying a negative times a positive, you're multiplying opposite signs, your product's going to be negative. When we're dividing fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So instead of dividing by 4 over 9, you multiply by its reciprocal, 9 over 4. Once again, a negative times a positive gives you a negative quotient. All right, let's take a look at our first example. Our first step is to write everything as a fraction. So we have 5 times 5 is 25 plus 1 is 26. So we have 26 over 5, but that's negative, all right? And then I'm dividing by 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, so 7 over 3. So first step, write everything as a fraction. Next, because it's division, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So the negative 26 over 5 doesn't change, but now we're multiplying by the reciprocal of 7/3, which is going to be 3/7. I always like for my students to check to see if we could divide out anywhere when we're multiplying, but I can't divide out 26 and 7, and I can't divide out 3 and 5. So that means we multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. Well, what's 26 times 3? That's going to be 78, but because it's negative times positive, right, it's going to be negative 78 over 5 times 7, which is 35. To simplify, 35 goes into 78 2 times, because 2 times 35 is 70. We have 8 left over out of the 35, and we know that that has to be negative. So we should get negative 2 and 8/35. Right? Let's try our example down here. We have negative times positive. When we multiply a negative times a positive, we know that that product is going to be negative. So I know whatever I get, it's going to be negative. So now I just need to multiply 2.5 times the 3.6. And when we do that, we multiply 6 times 5 is 30, 0 carry the 3, 6 times 2 is 12, and 3 is 15. 3 times 5 is 15, put down the 5, carry the 1, 3 times 2 is 6, 1 is 7. We add, I get 0, 5 and 5 is 10, 0 carry the 1, we wind up with 800. But we have 2 decimal places in our factors, so that means we need 2 decimal places in our product. So 2 decimal places in our product should be 8. But remember, we're multiplying a negative times a positive, so that should be negative 8, right, as our answer there. All right? Let's take a look at another example. If we're multiplying more than 2 rational numbers, we can use properties of multiplication to make the product easier to understand. For example, right, we would rewrite this as negative 1 over 7 times, right, the negative 7, right, which we'll put over 1, times the 4/5. So we just used the commutative property of multiplication because we changed the order of our multiplying. Now, how does that make it easier? Well, negative times negative is positive, right? And I have 7 in the numerator. It's going to cancel the 7 in the denominator. So they become 1s. So essentially we're multiplying 1 times 1 times 1. 1 times 1 times 4, which is 4. 1 times 1 times 5, which is 5. And yes, the product will be positive because I have an even number of negative factors. So my answer here would simply be 4/5. All right? We continue. All right? Let's do each one of these. Problem number 1, first step, recopy it. Negative 6/5 divided by negative 1/2. Next step, when we divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. So that's going to be negative 6/5 times negative 2 over 1. I can't divide out anywhere, so I multiply numerator times numerator. 6 times 2 is 12. Denominator times denominator. 5 times 1 is 5. Because I have an even number of negative factors, my product's positive. 12 over 5, that's going to simplify to 2 and 2/5 would be our answer for problem number 1. Let's try problem 2. We want to first copy the problem. So I have 1/3 divided by negative 2 and 2/3. Next step, write everything as a fraction. 1/3 divided by 3 times 2 is 6 and 2 is 8. That's negative 8/3. Once we write everything as a fraction, I see that we're dividing fractions, and when we divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. So it's going to be 1/3 times negative 3 over 8. I always like to check to see if I can divide out, and I can divide out my 3's here. Alright, so that's going to be 1, and that's going to be 1. Alright, so we're left with 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 8 is 8, a positive times a negative, right, that's going to be negative. So we have negative 1/8 would be our quotient there. Problem 3. Alright, let's do problem 3. Squeeze it in here. We have 1 and 8/10, right, times negative 5 and 1/10. Now I know my answer has to be negative because a positive times a negative is a negative. So I always like to write my product, the sign of my product, before I actually multiply. So now I just need on the side of my paper 1 and 8/10 times 5 and 1/10, right? I'm just multiplying. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. 5 times 8 is 40. Put down the 0, carry the 4. 5 times 1 is 5, and 4 is 9. We're adding. I get 8. I get 1. I get 9. I have 2 decimal places in my factors, so I need 2 decimal places in my product. But I also know that a positive times a negative is a negative, so we have negative 9 and 18/100 would be the product for number 3. Alright. Number 4, let's squeeze down here. Problem 4, we have negative 6 and 3/10 times negative 6/10. I know that my product's going to be positive because a negative times a negative is a positive. So now I'm just multiplying 6 and 3/10 times my 6/10. 6 times 3 is 18. Put down the 8, carry the 1. 6 times 6 is 36. 1 is 37. We have 2 decimal places in our factors, so I need 2 decimal places in my product. Negative times negative is positive, so we have positive 3 and 78/100 there. Alright, next step, or next problem, problem 5. Copy the problem. We have negative 2/3 times 7 and 7/8 times 3/2. After we copy the problem, let's write everything as a fraction. So that's going to be negative 2 over 3 times 8 times 7 is 56, and 7, that's going to be 63 over 8 times 3/2. We look to see if we can divide out anywhere, and I can divide out a few different places here. 3 in the numerator and 3 in the denominator, they're going to divide out. They become 1, that becomes 1. I have my 2's here. 2 in the denominator divides out that 2 in the numerator, so that becomes 1 and negative 1. Let's see, can we divide out anywhere else? No, but there's no need to. I know that I have 1 negative factor, so that's an odd number of negative factors, so I know my product's going to be negative. And then we have 1 times 63 times 1, that's 63. 1 times 8 times 1, that's 8. So we wind up with negative 63 over 8. If we want to write that as a mixed number, 8 times 7 is 56, and we're left with 7 as a remainder over 8. So negative 7 and 7/8, right, is the mixed number form of negative 63 over 8. Let's look at problem 6. Problem 6, right, copy the problem. Negative 7 and 2/10 times the 0 and 1/10 times negative 100. Well, we have 3 factors here, and 2 of them are negative. So because we have an even number of negative factors, I know my product's going to be positive. All right. Now we're going to use some properties here, right? If I multiply 1/10 times 100, right? So I'm going to slide the decimal point 2 places to the right. 1, 2. That becomes negative 7 and 2/10 times, when I slide this 2 places, that's 10, right? Because the product of 1/10 times 100, that's going to be negative 10. So now I multiply negative times negative is positive. 7 and 2/10 times 10, that should be 72 for our product. All right. Let's look at our next example. We're given a word problem. It says that an investor owns stocks A, B, and C. What's the mean change in value of the stocks? Well, to find the mean, we have to first find the sum, and then we divide by the number of terms. So we start by finding the sum here. 9 and 8 is 17, and 2 is 19. Put down the 9, carry the 1. 1 and 3 is 4, and 2 is 6. 6 and 5 is 11. Put down the 1. Carry the 1. 1 and 0 is 1. And 7 are 8. 8 and 0 is 8. 8 and 2 is 10. 10 and 8 is 18. 8 carry the 1. 1 and 1 is 2, and 1 is 3. 3 and 2 is 5. Alright? Made a mistake, so let's redo that. Right, because first we have positives and negatives there. So first let's add the 2 negative terms together. So that's going to be negative 180 and 39 hundredths. And we have negative 280, 52 hundredths. So I'm going to find the sum of the negative numbers first. 9 and 2 is 11. 1 carry the 1. 5 and 3 is 8. 1 is 9. Decimal point 0. 8 and 8 is 16. 6 carry the 1. 1 and 1 is 2. And 2 is 4. So my negatives, right, total 460. But then I have to add the 127.28. So when we have opposite signs, we have to subtract their absolute values. So I'm going to do the 127.28. And I know that my answer is going to be negative because I have more negative than I do positive. All right. Can't subtract 8 from 1, so we borrow from the 9. Rename it an 8. That becomes 11. That's 3. That's 6. Decimal point. Borrow from the 6. Rename it a 5. That's 10. That's 3. That's 3. That's 3. So we wind up with negative 333.63. But now to find the average, right, because they're looking for the mean is average, I want to divide that by 3. But I know that a negative divided by a positive is going to be negative. So I want 3 into 333.63. We divide. That goes in 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract, I get 0. Bring down the 3. Goes in 1 time. 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract, we get 0. Bring down the 3. 3 goes into 3 1 time. 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract, we get 0. Bring down the 6. 3 goes into 6 2 times. 2 times 3 is 6. Subtract, we get 0. Bring down that last 3. 3 goes into 3 1 time. We know that a negative divided by positive is negative. So my mean would be negative 111 and 21 hundredths. Alright. It asks us, problem 7 asks us, well, suppose if we add another stock, right, stock D, whose change is positive 500 $68.23. Well, now we need to add that to this sum here. So I'm going to take my 568 and 23/100ths. I'm subtracting, right, because they're opposite signs, we have to subtract their absolute values. 333.63, right? I'm subtracting, and I know my sum's going to be positive because I have more more positives than we do negatives. So let's subtract. That's 0, 7, 12, that's 6, decimal point, 4, 3, 2. So we have 234.60, but now we have to divide that by 4, right? So we're going to do 4 into the 234.60, right? Because the mean now has another number, so we're dividing that by 4. 4 goes into 20 5 times. Subtract, we'll get 3. Bring down the 4. 4 goes into 34. 4 times 8, right, is 32. Subtract, I get 2. Bring down the 6, decimal point. 4 goes into 26. What? 4 times 5, 6 times. 6 times 4 is 24. Subtract, I get 2. Bring down the 0. That's going to be 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, we get 0. Right, so that mean change is going to be 58.65 because we're dividing a positive number by a positive number. So that would be the mean change in value. All right. Okay, let's look at a few more examples here. Right, we're multiplying the mixed numbers. Write everything as a fraction first, so that's going to be 1 over 4 times 9 times 8 is 72, and 4, that's 76, over 9. I could divide out because these are both even, right? And 4 does go into 76 even. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. What's 76 divided by 4? I believe that's right, 80 divided by 4 would be 20, so that's 19. So we wind up with 19 over 9, right? And if we write that as a mixed number, that's going to be what? 9 times 2 is 18. Subtract, we get 1 and 1/9. 2 and 1/9 would be correct. Next example, write everything as a fraction first. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16, over 3 times 3 over 1. We divide out, 1 and 1, and we wind up with 16 over 1. Alright, next example. Write everything as a fraction first. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 and 7 is 15. Right, so that's 15 over 8, that's negative, times 2 times 5 is 10, 2 is 12, over 5, right? And that's also negative, right? Negative times negative, I know that my product's positive, but I can divide out a lot here, right? I can divide out 5 and 15, that's going to become 1 and 3. I can divide out 8 and 12 by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2, 12 divided by 4 is 3. Numerator times numerator, 3 times 3 is 9. Denominator times denominator, 2 times 1 is 2. Negative times negative is positive. 9 over 2 simplifies to what? 4 and a half, right, for our answer there. Next group of problems. 1/4 to the second power, that's 1 over 4, times 1 over 4. I always like to start by writing my powers as a product of its factors. So 1/4 is the base. It's going to be used as a factor 2 times. And now we multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and we get 1/16 there. Problem 27, I want to write that power as a product of its factors. So that's going to be negative 2/3, right, times negative 2/3, right, times negative 2/3. We have an odd number of negative factors, so I know my product is going to be negative. So now it's just numerator times numerator times numerator. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8 in the numerator. Denominator, 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27. And we have an odd number of negative factors, so that product is going to be negative. Alright. Next example, we have some complex fractions. That's when we have fractions in the numerator and or the denominator. Right, so we want to start by simplifying each side first. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So that's going to be 4 thirds over 1 over 4. And that's going to be times the 2/5. So let's start. Actually, I'm going to simplify by, where's my eraser? Right, I want to simplify by doing this left side first. So that is the same as, right, that's the same as 4 over 3 times, multiplied by the reciprocal, that's going to be 4 over 1. 4 times 4 is 16, 3 times 1 is 3. So this first part here becomes 16 over 3. Right, so I'm going to write 16 over 3, right? That's what this becomes. And that's going to be times whatever this is. So I'm going to do that in red down here. That's going to be 2 over 5 times, when we multiply by the reciprocal, 2 over 1. Numerator times numerator is 4. Denominator times denominator is 5. So now we have 16 over 3 times 4 over 5. We multiply, because I can't divide out, 16 times 4 is 64. 3 times 5 is 15. And then I could simplify by dividing 15 goes into 60 4 times, with what? 4 left over out of the 15. Right? And there's my product. Right? That one's a little tricky. Right? We have another complex. So let's see what that's going to be. I'm going to take care of this first. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. Right? So that's going to be 5 over 3 divided by 9 over 1. Right? So that's going to be 5 over 3 times 1 over 9. When I multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, that's 5 over 27. Right? So this part here, that's 5 over 27. And then we have to figure out the second part. Right, so let's figure out the second part here. Right, that second part I'll do in red. Right, so let's do that in red, the second part. So we have 9 times 1 is 9, plus 1 is 10. That's 10 over 9 over 3 over 1. That's going to be the same as 10 over 9 times 1 over 3. Numerator times numerator is 10. Denominator times denominator is 27. So now we have 5 over 27 divided by 10 over 27. We multiply by the reciprocal, right? So that's going to be 5 over 27 times 27 over 10. All right, well that's real friendly. We divide out, that's going to be 1 and 1. Divide out by 5, that becomes 1. That becomes 2. So we do all of that math, and we wind up with 1/2 as our answer. All right. A couple more left. Right. Problem number 15. Much easier. You should probably try that on your own. Give it a shot first. But that's going to be 5 over 9 times, when we multiply by the reciprocal, 6 over 5. Divide out, that becomes 1 and 1. Numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. We get 6 over 1. Next example, write everything as a fraction first. 5 times 7 is 35, and 2 is 37. So that's negative 37 over 7. Divided by 7 times 2 is 14. 1 is 15 over 7. Now we multiply by the reciprocal, so the first fraction doesn't change. But we multiply by 7 over 15. All right, we look to see if we can divide out, and we can divide out these 7s by 7. They become 1s. So we wind up with, right, that should be negative. Don't get sloppy here, so that should be negative. So negative divided by negative means that my quotient is going to be positive. So we wind up with 37 over 15. And when we simplify 37 over 15, 15 goes into 37 2 times, right? That's going to be 30, with 7 left over out of the 15. and that's going to be positive. Right, the last example, write everything as a fraction first. 5 times 5 is 25, plus 1 is 26, so that's negative 26 over 5, divided by 2/3. Now we multiply by the reciprocal, negative 26 over 5 times 3/2. Right, we look to see where we can divide out. We can divide out 2 and 26 by 2. That becomes 1. That becomes 13, but it's still negative. We multiply numerator times numerator. 13 times 3 should be 39, but that's negative. Denominator times denominator. 5 times 1 is 5. Right, so I make sure, right, I'm dividing positive by negative, so yes, my quotient should be negative. But now I simplify. 5 goes into 39 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35, so that means 4 left over out of the 5. So negative 7 and 4/5 would be our answer. All right, so I know that some of the math is a little tricky here. We got to be really good with our fractions and our multiplying, our dividing out. But if we take our time, we should be successful. All right, I hope that was helpful. See you soon.